Good morning from a little bit of a chilly autumn morning here in Hamburg. I'm super excited to be back in the city to show you guys more of what there is to see and do. I barely scratched the surface when I was here before, but I am back to see the sights and share it all with you. So let's go get some coffee. I headed to a place called Public Coffee Roasters and sat in the warmth of the cafe while I enjoyed a delicious flat white. Then I wound my way through the streets until I reached the BinnenAlster, or the Inner Alster. This man-made lake was originally created to serve as a reservoir for a nearby mill. You can now take a little boat trip around the lake if you'd like, but I was a little too early for that. Instead, I sat in the sunshine and then headed to the town hall, where I was meeting a tour guide to take a city tour. The Rathaus, or Town Hall building of Hamburg, is the seat of the government of Hamburg, as well as the seat of one of Germany's 16 state parliaments. Construction on this building began in 1886 and was completed in 1897. It's one of the few completely preserved buildings of this time period that remains in Hamburg. We toured around the city and even visited something that I have never seen before, a building called Rathaus, where we rode on a Paternoster elevator. You can head in here yourself for free if you're passing by. It still functions as a normal office building. Then we headed back outside to learn about the challenges the Hamburg port faces.
A very important port, it's the third biggest in Europe, and the original port in the Middle Ages that was here, the so-called Nikolai fleet. I like it when we have low tide, you see the Elbe, this is mouthing into the Elbe, and the Elbe is mouthing into the North Sea. And we still have here in Hamburg the tides of the North Sea. The difference between high and low tide is 3 meters and 67, something like that, or 68, it changes. And what you see when we have low tide, it's really just here, nothing and no water anymore. And that shows us also how difficult it is for the container ship. It's not, of course, they're coming over here. We have huge ports, let's say 3 kilometers westerly to Hamburg. There are the huge terminals, but they all have the problem with high and low tide. The huge container ships can only come in with a high tide.
We continued walking until we reached the remains of St. Nikolai Church, which was bombed in 1943 during an air raid, which destroyed much of the city and surrounding area. But somehow the spire remained unharmed.
The tower is 174 meters high. For 3 years it was the highest building in the world. Unbelievable but true, but it is very high if you look at it. And well, it has been destroyed during the Second World War, and they thought, what shall we do with it? Finally, they left the ruin as a memorial.
The next stop on our walking tour was to walk along Deichstrasse, where you can stop into cute cafes for lunch or a coffee. I highly recommend Café am Fleet, which is family run. Their coffee is strong and their apple cake is divine. You can also walk behind this row of restaurants to a small dock where sailors used to dock their boats and head straight inside for a drink when they returned to shore. This road leads you to a canal, which you can cross over and into an area called HafenCity, which used to be a huge part of the docks here in Hamburg until quite recently. Now it's packed with chic coffee roasters, cafes, and bakeries. One of the facts that our tour guide told us that I found really interesting was that if you have a business here in one of these buildings, your sign has to be in brass. From here, you may want to stop for lunch. There are so many amazing places to eat in Hamburg, but after 2 trips here, Berliner Bahnhof ranks as the #1 place that I've eaten in the entire city. The food is inventive, beautifully presented, but most of all, it is absolutely delicious. I had the fish with beetroot hummus and broccoli, and plenty of roasted garlic mixed through. Be sure to try the pear Bellini as well. If you like art, head near the main train station to a newly opened art space called Jupiter. Before 2020, it was actually a department store, but the city has repurposed it into a free space with each floor home to a different exhibit from local artists. While you're in Hamburg, you have to get out on the water. On my first trip here, my friend Alex and I took a ferry up and down the Elbe, which was a very cheap way to explore the river. On this trip, we headed out on a complete harbor tour. One of the best ways to spend an evening in Hamburg is to see a show at the Elbphilharmonie. This building is absolutely stunning, both inside and out. The exterior was designed to look like a hoisted sail or a water wave. If you don't want to see a show or you don't have the time, you can head to the plaza area to enjoy the views. There's a bar there where you can grab a glass of wine or a beer and take it out on the balcony and look out over Hamburg. The Grand Hall, where I watched a concert, is unlike any music venue I have ever been inside before. Good morning from a rainy Hamburg here along the Elbe. I am about to head into the Miniatur Wunderland. It's one of the most visited tourist sites here in Hamburg, apparently in Germany. So I'm excited to check it out. I think it's gonna be pretty cool. Let's go. Unsurprisingly, the museum is absolutely packed on a rainy Saturday morning. So you need to reserve a time slot, which I did not do because I didn't know. So be sure to do that, especially if you're visiting on a weekend. But the cool thing is that the museum is open until 1 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. So I'm gonna go tonight, go to time slot while I was there, and yeah, we'll get a second chance at it. So let's go get some coffee instead. I ended up going for a walk instead and discovering a church and bell tower that were well worth the morning confusion. I am here at St. Michael's Church, which is, we'll brave the rain for a minute, a Lutheran church with a bell tower that is 132 meters tall. I think you can go up, but it's a little bit cloudy, as you can see, so I'm not sure it's going to be worth it for the views. However, the clock tower at the top of the bell tower, or that's on the outside of the bell tower, is the largest in Germany. So there's some facts for you. Afterward, I stopped for lunch at Astra Brewery in the St. Pauli neighborhood, which does some great food and even better beer. The IPA was my personal favorite, but you'll find the lager all over the city. It was the perfect fuel for what ended up being the best thing that I did during perhaps both of my trips to Hamburg, the Beatles Tour with Stephanie Hempel.
A huge part of pop music history took place here in Hamburg. And it all happened in this very special area, the old red light area of Hamburg. And I always say this big word, pop music history. Of course, the Beatles, they are pop music history, and they kind of changed and shaped everything in the 60s, what we call pop music now. Starting with that a band writes their own material. No band really before did that. The Beatles kind of started that in 1962. I also say this big word because the Beatles were not the only ones here in the early 60s. The area of St. Pauli in the early 60s was full of British bands, especially bands from Liverpool. For the Liverpool bands, the area of St. Pauli, the clubs here, this was their first chance to earn good money with their music. And their music in 1960, when they came here for the first time, was not original music, it was rock and roll covers. So the bands were all booked to play rock and roll from the 50s, to play Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly, for the rockers, sailors and gangsters in St. Pauli. That was their main audience in the beginning.
This tour has it all. Live music, history, interesting facts, and amazing stories about a band that, thanks to my dad, I grew up listening to. I'll link to the tour information in the description below. We learned about the first clubs they played in, the tiny rooms where they slept, how much they really grew up in this city. If you love the Beatles, you should really take this tour. Of course, I couldn't forget to get back to the Miniature Museum for my 9 p.m. appointment. So I grabbed a bratwurst and headed over to see whether it was worth the hype and the €16 price tag. It's certainly a fascinating place. Even at 9 p.m. it was still packed with people, but I'm happy I got to experience it. You could easily spend hours here looking in at all the details of each miniature city that's been created. The next morning, I was up bright and early for one last coffee and snack, a traditional pastry here in Hamburg called Franzbrotchen. Franzbrotchen. It's like a croissant mixed with a cinnamon roll. It's heavenly and a lot easier to eat than it is to pronounce. Well, it has been an awesome trip to Hamburg. I'm all packed up here and just about to head to the airport to head back home. I highly recommend a trip to Hamburg. My second visit here, I still feel like there's so much to see and do. I'll definitely be back to this city. Between the nightlife, the food, the culture, the waterfront, the running trails, the boat trips, the museums, there is so much to do in Hamburg. I really recommend it if you like big cities, if you want to get to know a different side of Germany, if you just want to come to a really cool city and have a great night out while you're in Europe, Hamburg is the place. So I hope you enjoyed traveling around Hamburg with me. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. It really supports my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye.